thank you, Debbie, and thank you, B&H, for having me back. Thanks for coming. This is the national parks are a big passion of mine, and so I enjoy sharing that, and I hope you can see that in the presentation. This is actually at Olympic National Park that I shot this photo, and it's kind of a funny story because I got out on the beach. It's about a 20-minute walk through the woods to get to this particular beach. And I get down there, and I mean, I just timed it perfectly. The light was gorgeous, and I've got this huge sea stack out in front of me. I got the log here. So I set up the tripod. I get out the cameras. They're in my backpack. Get everything set up, being super careful because I'm working on sand, right? And right as I finally have it, this guy walks into my shot. He just walks in, boop, sets down, starts doing his thing. He never even saw me. So I said, let me wait. I'm waiting, and I'm waiting, and I'm just like, the light's gonna go. So eventually I had to go tell him. I said, you just walked into my shot. He was very apologetic. He moved right away, but gave me a story. Now I remember. So today's presentation is sponsored by Yes, and they're a watch company, and they make a cool product. I can tell you, honestly, I have never done a sponsorship with somebody whose product I don't use and enjoy and know that it's a quality product myself. And this definitely fits the bill. Yes watches are great for photographers because, first of all, they're very well-made watches. They're a quality product. But they give you all of this information right on the face of the watch. I'm actually wearing mine, which isn't the same model, but I'm wearing mine today if anybody wants to look at it. But an interesting thing is it's a 24-hour clock, so that it can show you the sunrise and the sunset times in a digital display, moonrise, moonset, the phase of the moon. So this is all great information when you're out shooting in a place like a national park to know this stuff. You can do it with apps and such, but it's really convenient to have it right on your wrist. Another thing it does, which kind of blows me away, is predicting the moon phases. From now to the end of the century, it can tell you when the moon's going to be full, half, new moon, etc. So if you want to plan a great shot for 2082, this will get you there. So if you want more information on the watches, you can go to yeswatch.com. I also have some literature up here if you'd like to take some of it at the end of the presentation. And again, if anybody wants to look at mine, you're more than welcome to afterward. So this is me. This is me at Everglades National Park on the Anhinga Trail. Has anybody ever been there? A few people. So this is one of the premier spots in the national park system for shooting wildlife, particularly birds. It's such a great spot. The trail is only about a mile long, but you really could spend an entire day there as a photographer and not get bored, not run out of birds, alligators, turtles. You could do sunrises here. It's a really great spot. What I want you to notice in particular that's important is that I'm wearing my B&H hat. This is me in Big Cypress wearing my B&H hat. Grand Teton, Smoky Mountains, it was very cold. Blue Ridge Parkway, B&H hat. And the Lamar Valley in Yellowstone National Park, wearing my B&H hat. So it's a very well-traveled hat. It's funny, you guys think you had it cold here last week? This was with wind chill at no more than than 15. And I had just gotten out of the car when I was doing this, and I could not have been in this getup for more than another 5 minutes because that hat came off and a wool one went on. Then I had the face mask, and then I had a Patagonia parka on. It was pretty cold, but a wild experience. And this is my national park outfit. I was a ranger at one point, and there I am. So just a little bit of background on me. I don't want to bore you with it, so we'll get through it quickly. I went to Sacred Heart University up in Connecticut. I was a media major, and while there, I only took one photography course, and it was the history of photography. And one of our very first assignments in the course, I just want to tell you how much I knew about photography at the time. we had to pick a photographer, any photographer we wanted in any genre of photography, and study their work and write a paper about their career and how they went about what they did. And the only caveat was it had to be a photographer who was not famous. I picked Ansel Adams. I'd grown up interested in photography because my dad was a serious amateur. My uncle was a professional photojournalist. We had a friend who was a career wedding photographer, a good friend of our family. So I was always interested. In college, I finally took it up, and my first job out of college was with Golf Digest, and then I worked with Tennis Magazine for 10 years, and I've been freelancing for the last 10. And again, as a kid, just why I got interested in nature and in the national parks to begin with is we were always camping. As a family, we would go camping. My dad would take me camping. It was in the Boy Scouts. My dad was a Boy Scout leader. He was a science guy. He was a marine biology major, and he was a science teacher, a high school science teacher. He would love bringing us out into the woods and teaching us about what this tree is and what that bird is. And when I was a kid, I didn't realize this until I was an adult, but when I was a kid, I thought that the concept of a father-son camping trip was what every kid did when they were growing up. I thought everybody did this because we always did it. And that instilled a love in nature for me. And so as an adult, when I started getting into photography, I was very naturally drawn to the national parks. Whenever I've had to travel on an assignment, if it was near a national park, I would try to get the art director to have me include that. I remember I was on an assignment in Marco Island, Florida, and I said, the Everglades are right there. We should cover that too. And even if I didn't, if I couldn't get an assignment, if I was traveling near a park, I would be there. And then, my idea of a vacation is going to a national park. I don't care if somebody's paying me to be there or not. If I can get there, I'm going to go, and I'm going to shoot for as long as I can before I have to come home again. As Debbie mentioned before, all that work is paying off for me. I have a book coming out this year, Photographing National Parks, and I will be back here. Love to see you again if you'd like to come when it's released this summer. The website is photographingnationalparks.com, which was supposed to launch this week. I don't think it has, but please go check it if you're interested in the book. And there's going to be a newsletter with free information about traveling in the national parks and gear and all that. So I invite you to come to the website, and it'll be easy to contact me through there as well. So let's start talking about some parks. Just as an introduction, let's go through a few. This is Acadia National Park up in Maine. I grew up in Connecticut, and this was the closest park to me. So to me, it feels like my home park. I've shot there 7 times. It's a great place. Bryce Canyon National Park in Utah, kind of an otherworldly landscape there. Grand Teton National Park, this is at Oxbow Bend, one of the photography hotspots. Redwoods National Park in California, which is very difficult to photograph because it's so hard to get the magnitude of the trees and what you feel when you're there. The Big Bend National Park in Texas. I spent a summer in the Australian outback. Big Bend in June was hotter. In fact, this particular photo is at the end of the hottest day I have ever experienced, including the Australian outback. This is Everglades National Park. Badlands in South Dakota. And this is only, it's not far away from Mount Rushmore, which is actually a national monument, but it's such an amazing place for a photographer. You kind of think, all right, it's a sculpture in the mountains, but the whole Black Hills area is beautiful. So if you were ever to go out to the Badlands, I highly recommend checking out Mount Rushmore National Monument while you're at it. This is in Shenandoah, great place for photographing bears and mountains, and Olympic National Park. I love the sea stacks on the Pacific Coast. I think because I grew up on the East Coast, and this is so iconic, on the West Coast. You get the sea stacks and all that, and I love it. I love photographing them when I go out there. Blue Ridge Parkway, which, while not technically a national park, is run by the National Park Service. And my favorite thing about the Blue Ridge Parkway, it's 469 miles without a traffic light. You can just go. Yeah, it goes from the southern end of Shenandoah to the northern end of Great Smoky Mountains. So you actually could make a whole trip out of the parkway and those two parks. And this is Yellowstone in the Norris Geyser Basin and Great Smoky Mountain National Park. So just a little taste of what the park system has to offer, and there's so much more. These are the parks that I've been to. This is 24 parks. There's 59 in the park system, so have I been to all? No. I don't really have an ambition to go to every park. Maybe I will, but for me, I like seeing new ones, but I also like going back to the same ones, especially as a photographer, because I get to really know the park and the weather and the light conditions, and it helps me photograph them better. So these are the ones I've been to the most, the ones that I feel like I'm an expert on these parks. Like I said, Acadia. I love the Everglades. Even as a kid, I had this attraction to the Everglades that I can't really explain, but I love going down there. Smoky Mountains, Olympic, even though I've only been there twice, it's such an amazing park, and we'll get into it later. And Yellowstone, of course, is, it's like a playground for photographers. So just a few quick facts on the parks. There's 59 of them. 27 states have at least one, and there's 2 territories. So the Virgin Islands has a national park, and I'm drawing a blank. Does anybody know? It's not, it's American Samoa. It's American Samoa National Park. I skipped the slide. Okay, so in total, it's almost 85 million acres of the United States is a national park, and that makes up 3.6% of the total landmass in the U.S. A lot of it is in Alaska. The first park was Yellowstone. It's a little bit of a tricky trivia question, because the first land set aside as a national area, anybody? Yosemite, but it wasn't a national park. Yellowstone was the first park. Yosemite was run by the state of California until it was stewardship was taken over by the U.S. government, and it was made one of the first national parks. The newest park is Pinnacles, which is in California, and it's only a year old. It was right about this time last year that it was established as a national park. It's supposed to be a great place for photography. I'm eager to get out there at some point. It is on the list of the parks I do want to visit, for rock formations and caves, and you can even photograph the California condor out there. It's one of the areas where the reintroduction has taken hold. The next national parks, there are a bunch that are, some people are pushing. The 2 that seem the closest are Katahdin Woods and Waters, which would be in Maine. It's kind of iffy about what's going to happen up there because you need a lot of public support to do it, and they're kind of 50-50 on it at best. I think the next one is going to be Colorado. Colorado National Monument has a lot of public support to turn it into a national park. The senator there and the U.S. representative there both support it, and that's a lot of what you need to turn a land into a national park. So I think that's going to be the next one. It wouldn't surprise me if that happens in the next few years. I don't know if they'll keep it as Colorado National Park or rename it, but that's kind of exciting. So I look forward to getting out there too. Getting into the parks, I think the best way, especially if you're passionate about it, is to buy an annual pass. They're only $80. If you're in the military, it's free, and seniors get a $10 lifetime card. My mom would not want me to tell you that she has one. And with the annual pass, you get into all these national lands, not just the parks, but any U.S. forests, anything run by the Fish and Wildlife Service, so all the wildlife refuges, all of this you get into for free. So if you wanted to go to even 2 or 3 parks in a year, $80 could actually save you money. and it's supporting the park system. Another interesting thing about the annual pass is the photo on it comes from an annual contest. And if you go to sharetheexperience.org, you can get all the information on it. And one of the great things is, the winner gets their photo on it, and you get a lot of exposure as a photographer. Additionally, the prizes aren't bad. I don't know why we keep skipping. $15,000 is your grand prize. I mean, that's not bad for entering a free contest. And you also get some gear and things too. There's kind of ancillary prizes that go with it. A professional cannot enter. If you're not professional and you want to give this a shot, I think this is one of the best contests out there. It's not a rights grab. They're not taking your photo. They're using it. But so some great prizes and great exposure that come along with this. One of the big questions: do you need a permit to photograph in the national park? And you probably don't. It's very special circumstances that require a permit, and a lot of people get confused about it because the rules used to be a little more confusing. The Park Service a few years ago did a really good job of clearing it up. And so here you go. You only need a permit if you're shooting in an area that's not normally accessible to the public. So if, say I was in Yellowstone and I wanted to go kind of up near the wolf dens or whatever, this is a very loose example, then I would have to have a Park Service person, a ranger, accompany me. And now we're talking about an expense, and a permit would be needed. If you use models or props, so if you're shooting a car ad and bring a car in or something, now you need a permit. And the park incurs any cost to monitor you. If you're doing something so extravagant that they have to keep an eye on you and have a ranger accompany you, then you're going to need a permit. I doubt any of us in this room are going to run into any of those scenarios. So you don't need a permit even if it's a commercial shoot. If it's only 2 people, if it's me and a lighting guy, no, don't need a permit, even if it's a commercial shoot. If you're only using cameras and tripods, so forget about the lighting guy, he's got to hold the light, then you don't need a permit. So most people aren't going to need it. Don't worry about it. The rangers know this. If you ever get questioned, all the information you need is right here at this website. So I'm sorry, did everybody who wanted that get it? I know I went through that slide quickly. Okay. There's 2 big points that I make whenever I'm talking to people about shooting the national parks. And a lot of what I say in the next hour and 45 minutes kind of has these 2 points as a premise. One of them is do research. If you're going to go spend 3, 5, 10, 14 days in a national park, I mean, you're spending money. I mean, you can do a national park trip cheap. You can do it for $200, $300 if you want to camp and all that. It could cost you $5,000, $6,000 too. Either way, you're spending money, and more importantly, you're spending your time. So I highly recommend doing some research before you go. Figure out at least a little bit what you could do, what you want to do while you're there, and we'll go through some ways to do that. 2 is spend the time there. When I was in my 20s, I would make these road trips with a photographer friend of mine, and we would go to the national parks. If it was on our route, we would be there. I mean, we were driving due east through Idaho, and we were going to go through Wyoming, and gosh darn it, we were stopping at Yellowstone for the afternoon. Yellowstone for the afternoon. It blows my mind now that as photographers we could spend 4 or 5 hours in Yellowstone. You miss so much. Spend some time there. Really get to know the place, and you'll find locations you like. And because you're spending a little time, you can go to them 2, 3, 4, or 5 times. Shoot them in the best conditions. You can go and say, "What a beautiful spot! It would look great in morning light. So I'm going to come back tomorrow." You can't do that if you're only there for a day. You can see a spot and know that it's maybe a forest scene that's going to look terrible in direct sunlight, so you need overcast. Well, if you're there for a few days, at some point you probably have some overcast lighting, and then you can go back and shoot it in the light that it needs. Incidentally, this is from last week. This is in Grand Teton. I had this photo lined up. In Grand Teton, it snowed almost every minute of every day for the week. So I was shooting a lot of trees because they were about all I could see. So I had this shot lined up, and all of a sudden this coyote just came through here. Okay, so places to stay, and this is important because it affects your budget, but it also affects how you can work. You can stay in park lodging. There's some beautiful, beautiful lodges in the park, but they're expensive and they're kind of few and far between. However, you do get electricity to recharge your batteries and your computers, your cameras, and you can stay warm in the winter, you can stay cool in the summer, and you get relatively easy access to the park. Most national parks have hotels near the park. I mean, you kind of leave park boundaries and you start to get support for the tourists who are going there. So you get all the same pros. The big con for me is you're not in the park. And some parks are big. I mean, Yellowstone is huge. If you wanted to shoot sunrise at a particular point, but you're staying up in Gardner, Montana, which is only 5 minutes outside the park, that could put you 3 hours away from your sunrise spot. Who wants to get up at 3 to shoot a 6 o'clock sunrise? It's hard enough to get up at 5 to shoot a 6 o'clock sunrise. My favorite option, but again, I grew up camping, so I know it's not for everybody. I love to camp in the parks. It's cheap. I can keep the budget down, which is great if I'm working on my own, and it's great if I'm working for a client. I mean, keeping the budget down is never a bad idea. My favorite part is that it's easy access. I mean, if I want to shoot that specific spot at sunrise, I can probably find a camp spot within a few minutes of it. Whether it's at an established campground or some backcountry camping, I can almost camp right there and get out of the tent and start shooting. And that's a big plus for me. The cons are you got to deal with the weather when you're camping. Do you have a shower? Do you have a toilet to use? Is there electricity? Can you recharge your batteries? So these are things you have to consider. I usually find ways, okay, we're taping, but I don't think I can get in trouble for this. I may or may not, during a camping trip in Yellowstone shooting, after 3 days of not having a shower, might have used the shower in the Old Faithful Lodge. I don't remember exactly. Anyway, there's ways to work around it. An RV is an interesting option too, and I've seen a lot of photographers in the parks. Especially I've seen some photographers who have retired and kind of bought an RV, and this is how they do it. They just sleep in here. They've got their gear in here. I saw a guy in the Everglades last year who had cabinets for his camera gear, and it was a big setup, and he just worked and lived right out of there when he was out shooting. Got to deal with the cons too. Low miles per gallon is a learning curve to driving an RV. It might not be the best option to rent one, for a trip if you've never driven one before. Just focus on the photography. So ways to get around the park. The obvious one is to drive. I mean, almost all of the parks have beautiful road systems. There are a couple parks you can't even drive to. Such as Katmai in Alaska, you have to fly into it. And a car's, I don't want to call it essential, but especially at the big parks like Yellowstone, you're going to need to move around. But watch out for bears. But what I really recommend is getting out of the car and walking. And my brother used to work in Yellowstone, and I forget exactly the statistic, but it's over 90% of people who visit Yellowstone don't go more than 100 yards away from the roads. And there are some beautiful spots on the roads. I mean, the roads in the park system were built to showcase how beautiful these parks are. But honestly, some of the best spots you have to hike to, and not even long. I mean, there are some really long hikes you can do in the parks, but sometimes even just hiking for 15 minutes gets you away from people and gets you to a better vantage point or to something that you'll never see from the road. If you're doing it in the winter, snowshoeing is a really good option, almost necessary in some of the parks. Now, this was in Grand Teton just last week, and like I said before, the snow, it was at least 6 foot deep because I could put my tripod right up to the head and I wasn't hitting the ground. You really can't walk in that without snowshoes. So if you want to get anywhere, you're going to want to be able to snowshoe. And it's not hard. and it keeps you safe, it keeps you stable, usually. So this is me. It was my fault. I wasn't using poles. I was walking up a drift, and I was just got lazy, and I didn't pick up my shoe all the way, and I tripped on the snow. My brother took the photo, and it was funny. I had a flashback with this because he turned around and he saw me, and I said, I need your help getting up because I didn't have poles on me. And he said, okay, but can I take your picture first? And this is where I had the flashback, because when I was in the 90s, I was in my 20s, and I was shooting with a friend up in Washington, Connecticut. And we were out on what we thought was a frozen marsh. Turned out to be a more significant body of water than that. We didn't know. And we're walking, and I hear a crack, and I fell through the ice. And I don't know if it's happened to anybody here, but that's a very fast thing to happen. You don't have time to think about it. You hear the crack, and you're in the water. Fortunately, I was only up to my waist. Unfortunately, my 80 to 200 millimeter lens was below my waist, so that was a repair. But my friend who was with me saw it happen, and he came over, and he got me out. We went, I bought some dry clothes, everything was fine. And he said to me, he fessed up later, he said, I really wanted to take a picture of you, but I thought you would get mad at me. And I said, I would have gotten mad at you, but I wish you took the picture. And that went through my head when my brother said that. I was like, yeah, take the picture, go ahead. So now I have it. So a little bit about safety. I don't want to call the parks unsafe. They're not. I don't want to call nature unsafe. It's not. But there are things you need to know. Just like living in the city, you know not to go for a walk in Central Park at 2 in the morning. There's things that you want to know when you're out in a national park too. So let's just touch on wilderness survival, wildlife, the plants you might have to deal with, and just some very essential gear to think about. And we'll go through this quickly because this isn't what the lecture is about, but I want you to think about it. So 2 points on wilderness survival. National park research shows that less than 1% of the accidents that happen are due to natural causes. So, being caught in an avalanche or a rock slide or, being attacked by a bear, that's not what usually gets people. It's usually people creating accidents on their own. And the other thing is that most serious survival situations happen to people on short excursions. And the reason why is because the people on the short excursions think that they don't need to be prepared. So you go out for a 2-hour hike thinking, I'm only going for 2 hours, and you don't have water, and you don't have food, and you don't have a way to start a fire. That person gets lost. That's the one who gets in trouble. The person who is going out for a week and therefore knows to carry those things, they get lost, and they have a much better chance of getting out of it. So this is a book I recommend. There's a lot of books on basic wilderness survival, but this is a fantastic one. Because a lot of the books, what they'll tell you is they'll teach you how to build a shelter and how to kill a moose and cook it and all that. His premise is that most people who get lost in the wilderness are rescued within 3 days. So you really don't need to learn Army survival skills. Incidentally, you can download the Army survival handbook, and that has some excellent information too. It's free. So he's just teaching you how to survive the 3 days, how to keep your temperature at 98.6 degrees. That's the biggest thing. You can survive 3 days without food. You can't survive 3 days if your body temperature is 92 degrees. So how do you stay warm in the winter? How do you stay cold and cool in the summer? This is an excellent book. Another thing, wildlife. So most people going into Yellowstone who are not cognizant of the reality think that their biggest problem is going to be bears. I don't want to get attacked by a bear. I'm going to go hiking. I'm going to have a bell. I'm going to have my bear spray. I'm afraid of being attacked by a bear. The reality is very few people get attacked by bears throughout the park system. Does anybody want to take a guess, with Yellowstone as the example, what animal does injure the most number of people? Squirrels, you got it. They're chucking nuts at you. I heard somebody say it, at least one person, it's bison. And it's just kind of the mindset that people have. You see this docile animal that's just kind of out there chewing on grass, and they think they're not dangerous, but they don't want you near them. They'll just run you down. And I mean, I'll see articles a couple times a year about people getting chased. I once asked, a couple years ago in Grand Teton, I asked a park ranger, what's the craziest thing you've ever seen a photographer do? Because as a whole, we're good people, but we all know photographers who, think the rules don't apply to them because we need to get the picture. So this ranger tells me he once saw, and do you mind? He saw a photographer come right up to an elk like this. The wide angle lens, he's right in front of him, and an elk I think might be number 2 on the list in Yellowstone for injuring people. And I saw somebody do it 2 years ago. I was driving with my brother at the time. I told you he used to work out there. And we came around this bend and we saw a photographer, a Canon photographer. And he was right up in front of an elk. And I said, I really want to stay and see the show, but I'm hungry. This actually happened to me. I didn't know poisonwood. I had never heard of it. I'm from New England. I know poison ivy and oak and sumac. I can ID those. I was shooting in the Everglades last winter, 2013, and I was in the visitor center, looking around. It's one of the things I recommend doing to, learn about the environment you're in. And I saw a thing on poisonous plants in the park, and they had mentioned this, and I saw what the leaves looked like. And sometime that week, I was out shooting. I had staked out a spot for a sunrise shoot, and I'm kind of walking around, and I'm, just waiting for the sunset. And all of a sudden, I looked down, and I recognized it. And oh, that's bad. And I forget exactly what the symptoms are, but it's not something you want. It takes a while to clear up. And because I had, paid attention and done a little bit of research before spending that week in the park, I knew what to look for. Another thing I recommend is really good shoes. If you're out hiking, especially with a few $1,000s of gear in a backpack, if you're carrying around some heavy equipment, you're a little off your normal balance anyway, get some good shoes. I love these Salomon trail runners. If you can kind of see this wide base here, it's almost impossible to roll your ankle when you're wearing these. These Vask Mindbenders, this is the new shoe I'm wearing. They're really light. They've got great traction. I think I would have to try to slip while wearing these. And it's really important to me. Again, I'm carrying, we'll get to the gear stuff, but I usually have about $20,000 of gear on me, on my back. And a few years ago in Acadia, wearing a different pair of shoes, I did slip, and I scratched the front element of my 300-2.8. And it was a $700-800 repair, and all because the shoes didn't work for me, and I returned those shoes. Another thing is water. You always want to have water. One of the first things I do, like the first day, if I'm flying somewhere, I'd stop at a local supermarket and I stock up on some food to keep in the car, and water. I'll buy like the gallon jugs of it. I'll buy 4 or 5 of them just to have them. It's just so important to have it with you. And you get smaller bottles, you can refill them from the gallon jugs. Okay, so are there any questions to this point? We're going to get into gear and stuff. Okay, so like I said before, research, it's so important to me, and I think it should be important to anybody who wants to spend some time in the park, to know something about the park before you go. Now, just because you come up with a list of photos that other people have done or whatever, it doesn't mean you have to do it. But you're giving yourself a base, you're giving yourself a starting point, and you're giving yourself something to fall back on if you don't come across any surprises. Oh, incidentally, this is on the Blue Ridge Parkway. It's at Mabry Mill. Is anybody familiar with that? It's they call it the most photographed spot on the Blue Ridge Parkway. Oh, and I have another photo of it later. I'll point it out. But because it was one of the most photographed spots, I tried to find a way to shoot it that other people hadn't. So I did kind of this close-up. All right, so doing your research. I'm always downloading a map. The Park Service has all of their maps right on the website at this address, and I'll give you a minute if you want to write it down. You can download any park map. So if you were going to, go to Olympic National Park for a week, I highly recommend just download it and print it out. And then as you're reading about the park, as you're doing other research, you can make notes in it about where you want to stop when you're there, about, hey, we'll go check out this waterfall on a cloudy day. If there's going to be a good sunset, then here are some good spots. And write it down, and again, it gives you a starting point. Bob Hitchman is a photographer. He's been doing this newsletter for a long time. I think since the 80s. So the Photograph America newsletter. And whenever he does this 4 times a year, and a lot of his newsletters have covered national parks, and they're excellent information. I mean, this is from a photographer who's there on a shoot, and he's giving you his notes, basically. They're 8, 12, 16 pages with photos and a lot of information. He talks to the rangers, and he knows the stuff. And so if you can buy his whole set, which is actually a great deal as opposed to buying them individually. But if you were going to go to the Grand Canyon, I would recommend picking this up because you could read about another photographer's experience and get tips directly from them. And again, you don't have to do what he did. It's just good to have the knowledge. I mean, even if you want to avoid what every photographer has done, you have to know what they did before you can do that. Another one is you can find books. There's one publisher in particular, I believe it's Countryman Press, who has published, I don't know, maybe about a dozen books on shooting in the national parks. Bless you. Some of the parks even have more than one. I think there's 2 for Yellowstone. Yosemite probably has 9 of them. But they get into a lot of detail about specific spots to shoot and the best times of year and the best times of day. And these can be great resources as well. There's some websites to check out. And in particular, the forums on these websites can be very helpful. LuminousLandscape.com has an excellent forum, as does travelsphotographer.net and photo.net. You go on there and you can ask people who live in that area, people who have shot the park 20 times. So many people are helpful and will give you suggestions about where to go. Photo.net as well also has some articles written by photographers who have been to certain parks. And you can get a lot of good inside information that way. NationalParksTraveler.com has a lot of articles about all the parks too. And they just started something that's very interesting. It's a wiki for the National Park System, covering great views and great hikes and a lot of inside information. And a lot of the parks haven't been filled out yet, because like I said, it's relatively new. But if they can get this to stick, that could be an invaluable source of information. Another one, this is my brother, who worked in Grand Teton for a summer and worked in Yellowstone for a summer. And he's a photography enthusiast, and so he gets it. And he's given me so many good tips about where to shoot. It's kind of like having a permanent scout in these locations. So I highly recommend getting a family member to move to a national park. He's actually in Jackson, Wyoming right now. He showed me this spot. In fact, this is the Grand Prismatic Spring in Yellowstone. And the year he worked out there, I had told him, I said, I'm going to come out and look for some spots for me. The first day, I was out there for 10 days. The first day he said, go here. And almost every day he was asking me, did you go, did you go, did you go? It's like, no, I'm going to shoot a spring, I'm doing blah, 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 blah. And he kept on me about it. And finally on my last day there, he said, I'm taking you. And so we went. There's no trail leading to this spot. It's kind of the locals know it. And you kind of go down a trail and you have to know when to branch up and walk up this hill that you got to climb over logs and all this, and you get this great view of the spring. And you could do the same thing on the other hill, but I've never done it, but I've seen some fantastic photos from the other side as well. Boy, am I glad he forced me to do this. It's such a beautiful spot. Another one is talk to the rangers. The rangers will help you. I've only one time ever had a ranger who wouldn't, I kind of asked her, hey, you have any great secret spots? And she said, well, they wouldn't be secrets if I told you. You gotta be kidding me. But this is a good example. This is Taggart Lake in Grand Canyon, in Grand Teton. It's about, how many miles? I think it's about a 2-mile hike up through the foothills, the minimal foothills that are there, through the woods. And I did not read about this lake anywhere in any of the research I've done on Grand Teton as far as photography. But I had asked a ranger, hey, what are some spots you like? And she said, you know what I like, and like nobody's going up there for photography, is Taggart Lake. So I took the hike, and how could you not like shooting here? I mean, how is this not one of the most famous spots for photographers in the park? How is this not the cover of a book on shooting Grand Teton? It was, 2 miles uphill, but it's such a great spot. Incidentally, I snowshoed to this spot last week, and as you might expect, it's completely different in the winter because you can't see the water. It's frozen over. There's 8 feet of snow on top of it. I couldn't even see the mountains because of all the snow falling. So it was just trees and a flat expanse. But it was a fun hike. And another thing is other photographers. I think every time I've been in a park, I meet other photographers who are either at the beginning of their trip there or at the end of their trip there. The ones at the end of their trip, boy, are they useful. Because they've been there for a week or 2 weeks already, and they've found some cool spots, and most of them will share them with you. The ones you can get into a conversation to begin with, they're the ones who are likely to share with you. And that's how I found this spot. I was shooting. This is this Second Beach? Yeah, this is Second Beach at Olympic National Park, and about 600 yards north of here is an arch out on a point. And what I wanted was to shoot the sun setting through that arch. But you could, how sometimes you're shooting a sunset and it gets to be half hour before, and then it's 25 minutes before, and you can just tell the way the clouds are moving that you're not going to get anything good, that the sun's going to get hidden before it hits the horizon. That's what that night was like. And I'm like, I've been set up here for an hour, and there was another guy shooting near me, and we were talking about it. And he said, well, if you go a few hundred yards up the beach, there's this spot where the sea stacks kind of line up and recede into the horizon. And I said, oh, great. So I went. And again, it's just talking to people, and you get so much useful information. And I always try to pass it on, too. If any photographer talks to me and asks about spots, I tell them. Why keep it a secret? One of my favorite things about photography, and I will do, every time I see an opportunity to do this, I'll do it. And if you haven't done this, I recommend it. If you're in the same place with another photographer, both shoot the same thing. Because you'd be amazed at how two photographers using the exact same camera and the exact same lens will shoot something completely different. And it really blows me away every time I do it. And I'll see what they did. I say, I didn't see that. And I feel like what I came up with was a perfectly good photo, but I didn't see their interpretation. So much of it happens in your brain. Another thing is look what other photographers have already done. Google Earth is a great place for this. It's a free software you can download. It's a world atlas, and it'll give you links to photos in the places that you zoom in on. And I believe they actually pulled them from Flickr if you set your permissions for them to do that. But you can see what other photographers have done there. And even if you don't want to repeat what somebody else has done, it'll show you what they did. It'll give you a starting point, and it can give you ideas of what you want to do when you get there. Flickr, the same thing. You can very easily do a search. If you're going to Grand Canyon, just go do a search, Grand Canyon, and look, you find some spots that aren't on the maps and ideas of how to shoot things differently. When you're in the park, look for other photographers. In Yellowstone, I can't tell you how many times you come across a scene like this where somebody sees a bear, or I think this might have been a wolf, because this is in the Lamar Valley and there's a wolf pack there. And it's like they're magnets for each other. One photographer stops, and now there's two, and now there's two tourists from Toronto, and before you know it, you have a group, and everybody's saying, "What do you got? What do you got?" And the first guy's like, "Stop for a sandwich." It's weird. There have been times when I've stopped just to check a message on my phone, and before I know it, there's 3 cars behind me of people getting out. Look at what's over there. But they do lead you to good photo ops too. Or you see the group, and then you know that some other really good spot is uninhabited because everybody's over here. The gift shops are a good spot. I try to stop at the gift shop my first day or two in a park and look at the calendars and the postcards. And again, just looking to see what other people have done, where the good spots are. Do I want to go there? Do I want to avoid them? It's up to me, but it's good to know this information going into it. the back roads. This is huge. I've got to ask a ranger about this someday. If there is any national park that does not have some unmarked back road. It's on the map, it's on the park map, but there's no sign when you get there. It's in Grand Teton, and you can just kind of drive right down to the Snake River. It's a few miles on this dirt road. And I mean, really, I can't think of a park I've been to where I didn't find something like this. If there's a road that's not on the map, or if it doesn't have a do not enter sign, I'm down it. Because you always find good stuff. And this is an example. This is an Everglades National Park. The road's on the map, but it's not marked. You could very easily miss this when you're driving on the main road in the Everglades. I mean, it's just this. It's not even a dirt road. Like, it looks like it was once paved with chalk or something. It's all broken up. It's weird. It looks like a service road. I can tell you, 999 of 1,000 people who pass it don't even notice it. But I saw it, I drove down it, and I found this great little lake down there. There's not a lot of great spots in the Everglades for a sunrise over water, surprisingly, but I thought this would be one, and I ended up going back to this spot a few times while I was there. So again, my first day in the park, this is what I'm doing. I've already scouted all these locations, doing my research. So now I want to go see them in person. So I kind of drive around. There have been times when the whole first day I'm in a park, I'm just driving. I'm barely even shooting because I want to get my notes together. I'm also looking for new locations. And I want to learn the park regulations because they're all a little bit different, especially with how to deal with wildlife and can you pull off anywhere, or does it have to be at a lookout or a trailhead? I always want to know that stuff ahead of time. And I'm making notes. What are the good spots? What times of day do I want to be there? Is this a good sunrise spot? Is it a good sunset spot? Is this awful if the sun's out? Do I want to be there when it's cloudy? Do I want to be there when it's rainy? And if I'm there for a week, I'm probably going to have all these conditions. So now, when Wednesday comes and it's raining, I have something I could reference and say, okay, I wanted to shoot here if it was raining, and here and here and here, and now I know what I'm doing. This is a map of Acadia. This is from when I did a fall shoot up there, and I made a lot of notes. Like right up here, I've got a photo of this later. There's this kind of trail that goes through this tunnel of birches. So I'm doing this. I have a file of maps from all my trips, and they're marked, Grand Teton Winter 2014, right there. And I always reference them if I'm going back to a place. And here's an example of how this comes in handy. So Everglades National Park. Oh, don't take the picture yet. Wait till you see what's coming. So Everglades National Park. This was last year, the first or second day I was there. I saw this tree. It looked interesting. The light wasn't great. But I'm thinking, you know what? I like the shape of the tree. I might be able to do something with this at some point. And then, I needed a sunset location. I said, wait a second. I was facing west when I saw this. It's in my notes. Next day. There we go. So I've got a good sunset coming. I already know a good spot to go. I didn't have to look for this while the sun was getting closer and closer to the horizon, feeling anxious that I'm going to miss it. I already knew where to be a half hour before this happened. The next night, I was doing some night scenes, and I had scouted locations that just were completely flat. They were awful when I got there. I won't get into it, but I mean, they just didn't work. Sometimes you scout a spot, looks great, and then you get there and it just doesn't work. So, you know what? Let me go back here. Oh, you can see it better over here. But again, I knew a spot that I could go. And it's so much better than running around trying to find something at the last minute. Now here, back to Acadia again. This was a winter shoot in Acadia a few years ago. In January, they get something like, annually like 9 million feet of snow every January. I get up there and there's nothing. There was like an inch on the ground that melted the next morning. The whole week, all I could really do was scout. I did get a dusting one morning. I did some shooting then. I got some nice fog. I did that. But I was supposed to be there to shoot winter scenes, and there was no snow. But I spent the week scouting locations, and there was a call for 4 inches of snow on my last day there. So I knew I needed to maximize that day in order to come home with the photos that I needed. So from all the scouting I did, I went and I circled every spot that I thought would make for a good snow scene. Oh, I'm going to use the pointer. So you see, over here on Echo Lake, and you can't see it on this map, but there's a lighthouse down here near the candy jar. And up on Eagle Lake, there's some great scenes. Actually, I've got a photo from that later. And so what I was able to do is get up that morning. Also, I noted when high tide was, because that's pretty important when you're photographing near the water. Especially up in Maine, the tide's a 30-foot difference. So the scene looks drastically different between high tide and low tide up in Maine. So that day, I was able to take this map out and bang, 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 and just make a circle around the island and hit all those spots. And I was only able to do that because I researched and scouted when the light and the weather conditions weren't right for the photos that I wanted to do. Oh, Mabry Mill on the Blue Ridge Parkway. So you can see why it's the most photographed spot, right? Okay, so we'll talk a little bit about gear, which we all love because we're photographers, right? I'm actually not a gearhead, so let's plow through this and get to the parks. This is what I, give or take, what I have on a shoot. This last one, this Grand Teton Yellowstone I just got back from, I didn't bring either the 500 or the 300 because I knew I was going to be snowshoeing with everything on my back. And who wants a 14-pound lens on their back along with everything else when you're 2 miles out into the woods on snowshoes? But I try to cover a range. I was a Boy Scout, be prepared. So I've got wide angle through as big a telephoto as I think I'm going to need for certain conditions. Usually in Yellowstone, I would say, yeah, bring the 500 because you got some wildlife. And the Everglades, a 500, a 600, an 800 if you can do it. If you own one, great. If you don't, you can rent it. Because the birds in the Everglades, you want a good lens for the birds. I'm always using a tripod. I said 99.9% of the photos I take, I'm using a tripod or a monopod. I started as a sports photographer. Debbie mentioned earlier that my tennis stuff, so that's how I got accustomed to using a monopod. But it's also great if you're in a park and something's happening quickly and you don't want to have to take the 15 minutes to get the tripod set up right. You pull out the monopod, and at least it gives you a few more stops of stability. But as far as hand holding, I hardly ever do it. I'm also using a really Right Stuff ball head. And again, the Gitzo tripod. I'm trying to use the best gear that I can get. I kind of live by the philosophy of never be afraid to buy the best because you'll never be disappointed. And I've never been disappointed in any of this equipment. I'm using Lexar cards. I don't know if you don't know, this is great to know. The Lexar professional line of cards, if anything ever goes bad with them, you can send it to them. They will recover your data, send the data to you, and replace the card all for free. That's their guarantee, and it's a solid guarantee. I bring the computer. I like to back up to the computer all my photos. Polarizing filter, I have 2. That's how important they are to me because I never want one to break and then be without it. I also will use some neutral density filters. In the digital world, I think that's all we need. I think that warming filters are obsolete now because you can do a better job in post-production on the computer. And I always have 2 cable releases too. Again, if I'm doing anything on the tripod with slow shutter speeds, I'm doing it all the time. I feel like I'm always pushing the envelope on the shutter speeds. So I always have a backup cable release as well. I actually did lose one a few years ago and had the backup. They can also break too. Silicone jar opener, huge. I've used this so many times. Does anybody know what it's for? Yeah, filters. They're so good. You get a filter stuck on the lens. These silicone jar openers, they just pop right off. A high beam distance flashlight. I do some night photography, and these powerful flashlights are good for focusing. You get your camera set up, shine the light on what you're shooting, and it helps you focus, whether you're using live view or autofocus. And another good trick is if you've got somebody with you, have them bring the flashlight out to what you're shooting, and then you can focus on the light, which is even more helpful. I also love this cap light. I know a lot of photographers use the headlamps. I've always felt they were kind of overkill. I mean, if you like them, great. I never wanted to wear one. For a little bit, I had a hat with the LED lights built into it, but you know, people always think you're weird. These cap lights are great because I can put it on my B&H hat, right, or any other hat, and it just clips right to it, and I can see what I'm doing when I'm working at night, and still have both hands free. Okay, 3 reasons to pack some food, and these are all, again, you can tell my priority is the photography. I'd rather get good photos than a good meal. I don't want to leave a photo op. You know, if you're in the middle of a park, the closest restaurant could be 2 hours away. I don't want to have to leave, you know, the baby bison cuddling with its mother in great magic hour light because I get hungry. So if I've got some food in the car, then I can just eat. I can eat right there. I can eat while I'm waiting for the light to change. Oh, what a great scene, but sunset's an hour and a half away. Well, I'll eat while I'm waiting. Also, you could get stuck. So just for survival, if the car breaks down, you know, 3 hours out into the woods, you've got some food with you. You know, all this stuff. Again, first day of the trip, I'm stopping at a supermarket. I pick a bunch of this stuff up and put it in the car. One thing you do have to look out for is the wildlife regulations, especially in Alaska and California. The restrictions about how you have to keep your food so the bears stay away from it can be pretty strict. So look that up. Every park's kind of different and how strict you have to be with it. Another big thing, and this didn't matter 20 years ago when we were shooting film and you know your batteries lasted 3 months. But now, you know, I shoot primarily with the D3S and I could shoot about a day and a half on one battery. But still I'm going to have to recharge. So I always carry a power inverter that I can plug into the car. And I can recharge everything. My laptop, my camera batteries, my GPS batteries, everything. I just have a recharger right there. I'm sorry, not a recharger, but the inverter, so I can recharge right in the car while I'm driving from one spot to another. I don't have to wait to get back to a hotel at night or to be eating at a restaurant with an outlet. So I kind of consider this mandatory equipment for being out shooting for more than a day. This is the one I use in particular, and I like it because I can also plug in a USB. And I love this feature that I'm going to use the pointer to point at. The auto shutoff, it recognizes if the car battery is dying. If it's sucking, so you know, if I leave it on while I'm out of the car, if it starts getting less juice from the battery, it just shuts off, so it doesn't kill your car battery. Geotagging. This is another one. I geotag everything I shoot, and you know, when the stock photography market used to be good, and I used to do that, I would have loved to be able to geotag because it would have saved me so much time in keywording my photos. Instead of spending hours trying to research what was the name of that mountain, you know, and trying to remember where I was, or because my notes weren't right, or more likely I just didn't take any. You know, geotagging, it would just put me right on the spot on the computer, and I could see everything I shot, where I was. If I want to go back there, I've got the information. A few things to consider. You want your batteries to be able to last, especially in the camera. I love the GPS that attaches to the camera and writes the data right into the file, but they kill the camera batteries. You know, my D3S that I could shoot a day and a half on one battery, that's more like 5 hours if I hook the GPS up to it. I also don't want it to be using up my hot shoe because I might want to put a bubble level there. I don't want it to be using up my 10-pin connector because I want to be able to use my shutter release. I also want it to work on multiple cameras. The problem with the ones that connect to the camera is, well, I've got 2 cameras. Well, now which one am I going to use it on? I want it to generate a track log that I can import to Lightroom. Lightroom's got the feature as of Lightroom 4. It's got the map feature. So you can import a track log, and it will automatically figure out where you were when you shot your photos by matching up the timestamps. Also, plug and play. A lot of the third-party GPS, the geotagging devices, aren't recognized as a drive. You need software to be able to access the data. I don't like that. I want to just be able to plug it in and use it. And So this is, I was saying that these are the ones that connect. This is Canon's version, which is relatively new. I think they've only had it for a couple of years. The Nikon ones, they do a great job. They just, like I said, they drain the battery, and they you can only use it on one camera, and it takes up, I mean, like the Nikon one is taking up my hot shoe and my 10-pin connector. So now I can't use a bubble level or my shutter release. Jeez. But it is a good product if those things don't bother you. I still keep it in my bag just in case. So how can you get the data if you're not using it? There's a lot of apps, there's a lot of phone apps, especially the iPhone, you know, the GPS is always on. So you can get an app to record where you are, and then you can match up the data later. Again, if you can, this one, Geotag Photos Pro, is very good because it will generate a track log that you can import to Lightroom. So you're saving steps. You don't really have to do anything manually except turn it on. This is the GPS unit that I use. It's not perfect, but it's as close to perfect as I've found. And it's the AMOD AGL 3080. You can, if you put rechargeable batteries in it, you can recharge it just by plugging this in, which is a great feature. But I have mine set to record where I am every 10 seconds. I think you could do like every half a second or something, but you know, 10 seconds is pretty accurate. I can't move that far that quickly. Things you do have to think about when you're doing this is you want to sync your camera with GPS time, which is actually different than Greenwich Mean Time. Because you know how every now and then you see that they've had to adjust the atomic clock by a second to keep up with, you know, the sun being flaky or whatever. GPS time is constant because they need it to, they can't skip or they can't lose seconds, they can't add seconds. So it's actually about 16 seconds ahead of or behind Greenwich Mean Time right now. So you want to set your camera to GPS time, which you can find in a lot of places online, but I always use this Leap Second website because they show all the official clocks next to each other. It makes it very easy for me to calculate anything I need to. Another thing is replace your GPS batteries before they run out, because you could lose your data if you don't. And you always want to dump your data before you fill it up. So the unit I use, I know I can get 2 weeks of data on it. I want to get it off there before it fills up because I don't want to be going around for 2 days and find out that it was full and I don't know where I was for 2 days. So now you can see all the spots, you know, everywhere I shot. Ooh, 525, I must have liked that spot. Oh, you know what that is? That's the Anhinga Trail. And down here in Flamingo, it's actually where I stayed. So now I know every place that I shot. And this is very handy information later, because now I can go right here. Here's my GPS data for this particular photo of the Grand Tetons. I can take this and put it into Google Earth, and now I can see exactly what I was looking at in Google Earth. So I can mark everything. Say I want to know the names of these mountains. I can mark them all. Here's the spot I was. I go to the overhead view and hover over each one. Okay, that one's South Teton. I think this is Grand Teton here, and etc. Now I know everything I shot. That might have been an hour of research a few years ago. Another thing, now I can go back into Google Earth. You know, I can go back to the ground view, and one of the cool things it does is it will show you what the light conditions are going to be like at certain times of day. So this is at sunrise. So this is January 20th, 2013. Oh, it was Ansel Adams' birthday last year. At 7:30 a.m., this is what the light was going to look like on that scene. The sun would have been coming from like over here. So it would have been front lit. In the middle of the day, this is what it looks like. And they even show you at night. You can see it better over here. So the stars are actually accurate to what you would see if you were in that spot. Again, I'm not trying to shove this down your throat. This slide would have been here whether they were sponsoring me or not. You can get this information on the watch too. It's a great thing to have with you. Quick glance, so you know, sunrise, sunset, high noon, all these things that you need to know. There's some apps that I find really helpful too. The Photographer's Ephemeris has actually been around since before the PDA days. I mean, I was using this in the 90s as a, I think the late 90s, early 2000s anyway, as a desktop application. And it's really, actually I have screenshots of these, so let's just move on and I'll show you what they all are. So the Photographer's Ephemeris, so this will pinpoint you. I have this set at on Cadillac Mountain in Acadia National Park. And I can see these lines. That's the angle of the sun at sunrise and sunset. And here's the moon at moonrise and moonset. So not only do I know the times of all these events, but I'll actually know what direction the light's going to be coming when it happens. This is invaluable information for planning. You know, I see this location this morning. What's it going to look like tonight? Is it worth coming back for? PhotoPills is a relatively new app that does a similar thing, but kind of from the opposite direction. And this is the example they use in their tutorials. I don't know where this is, but the idea is, oh, we've got this arch, and I want to shoot the sun setting through it, and I want it to be at this angle. What day of the year is the sun going to set right in that spot? And PhotoPills will help you figure that out. I warn you, PhotoPills is a very powerful app, and with that comes a big learning curve. It's not easy to learn, but it can give you an awful lot of information. This artist viewfinder is kind of interesting, so you can kind of look at a scene. You set what camera you have, and it'll tell you this is what it's going to look like with a 58mm lens, a 150mm lens. So that can be fun to play with. Tide graph, again, like I mentioned with Acadia, same thing with Olympic National Park, which I actually set this to. Let's go back. So James Island is right off the shore in Olympic National Park. So I set this for, well, we're a little late, but so at 4:20 p.m. today was high tide. So I know I wouldn't want to be there at 4:20 p.m. today to shoot tide pools. Okay, and that's where this becomes useful. And another thing is in Olympic National Park, again, the tides are so drastic that you can walk around a point at low tide that you can't pass at high tide. So if you're hiking 3 miles up the coast shooting, you're going to want to know if you're going to be able to get back again 3 hours from now. Another one I really like is the Skyview app. And again, there's a few like this. But you know, again, if I want to keyword my photos, I can just look at this. I just point my iPad up to what I'm shooting, and it'll tell me that you know, Orion is right here. I got Jupiter up here. If the moon's here, it'll actually show me the arc that it's traveling along, so I can predict, oh, if I wait 20 minutes, the moon's going to be here instead. So that's a really fun app. Okay, now we're at the parks. I'm running 10 minutes behind, but we're here. Okay, so let's look at some parks. We're going to look at Olympic, Yellowstone, Grand Teton, Great Smoky Mountains, Everglades, and Acadia. Not in that order. Now, I tried to put some photos in here to see what it's like, but also to see what it's like to be there and to shoot there. So starting with Acadia, it's not the biggest park. This is, you know, comparing it to the size of Manhattan. It's such a beautiful place, and it's one of the most visited parks. And I hesitate to call it it's not necessarily my favorite to shoot. It's kind of tied with a couple of others, but there's a place in my heart for Acadia because it's where I've been the most, and it was the one that, you know, I've always had the easiest access to growing up in Connecticut and now living in New York. This is at the Monument Cove, which is kind of a popular area to shoot sunrise. A lot of photographers like to focus on these cobblestones down here. That's not what I did in this photo, but a really beautiful spot to shoot any time of year. The sun's usually rising, you know, if you're at the cove. Over in here, very nice sunset light. You get great waves in a storm. Sunrises in Acadia are fantastic because you've got a true horizon over the Atlantic Ocean. It's also Cadillac Mountain for 2 seasons of the year. Cadillac Mountain in Acadia is the first spot in the U.S. to see the sun, which one of my first times up there I didn't know. And I wanted to be the first person in the U.S. to see the sunrise that morning, and I drove all the way out to Eastport, Maine, which is the easternmost point of the U.S., and I'm waiting, and there was another photographer who showed up, and I actually took a few steps east so I would be more east than he was, and gosh darn it, I was the first one. And later that day, I found out that Cadillac Mountain sees it first. This is just playing with the backlight of sunrise on the waves. I must have shot like 500 photos doing this. The light was fantastic. And again, that's an advantage of being in the park longer, is you have time to mess around. You know, if you're there for 2 days, you don't want to waste time on anything that you don't know is going to work. If you're there for a week and a half, you can say, oh, hey, here's an idea. Let me sit here for an hour and see if I can make it work. This is up at Jordan Pond, which is another popular area to shoot. And a photo from the fall, which is, Acadia is most famous for its fall photography opportunities. I have a photo later I'll show you. I shot in the winter in this same spot, and I tried to, my intent coming back here was to duplicate the photo from the winter in the fall, not thinking that in the winter I had walked 20 feet out onto the ice. These are, they're called the bubbles. It's kind of this mountain rock formation at the end of Jordan Pond that can be fun to shoot. And again, a lot of people, kind of the angle that I'm at now, this is where a lot of people stop because it's the easy spot to get to from the car. There is a trail that goes all around Jordan Pond, and there's so many great photo opportunities on that trail. And most people just kind of stay right there at the south end of the pond. Again, shooting in the fall. A lot of birches in Acadia, which I love shooting. Oh, and here they are. This is what I told you before about the tunnel through the birches. This is, again, another spot I could spend a lot of time. And while I was there, I was messing around with zoom blur. And again, something I wouldn't have done if I was there for a day. But being there for a week, I was like, you know what, let me play with this and see if I can come up with something I like. Again, the birches, they're all, you can find birch groves all over Acadia. This is at Bubble Pond, and this scene normally wouldn't have been great to shoot, but the fog, which you get a lot of in Acadia in the fall, it kind of obscured the messiness of the background, and I was able to do a nice photo with it. And the same thing here. This is at Echo Lake, and this is on the west side of the park, which is considered the quiet side because a lot of people don't go there. It's where the locals like to live because there's not a lot of tourists there. But again, there's actually houses in the background. There's a couple of houses up here. I wouldn't have done this photo without the fog, but with it, I thought it made a nice image. One of the things I like about Acadia, the carriage roads. Rockefeller built, he loved Acadia, and he built this series of roads that go all through the park. You can hike them, you can bike them, you can horseback ride them. You just can't bring a car on them. And they also do not allow snowmobiles in the winter on the carriage roads. Acadia is one of the few parks where you can just take off in a snowmobile in the winter on the park road, but not on the carriage roads. What I do like about them is it's so easy to get around the whole park. And if you have a bike, I love biking. So I've done this at Acadia where I'll put the cameras in my backpack and I'll get on my bike and I can be someplace in 5 minutes that it might have taken me 40 minutes to walk to. So I can kind of zip around and hit my spots faster and get exercise at the same time. And along the carriage road, you get, again, Rockefeller built these. I forget how many bridges there are, but these stone bridges, and every one was designed to be different and to fit into the landscape. And they're such a beautiful photography subject. And this one's off in the middle of the woods somewhere. But again, the carriage road goes right up here. So I think this is about a half-hour hike from the closest parking area, but on a bike I got there in 5 minutes and then spent 2 hours wandering around doing different angles. It's funny, while I was here, there was I'm going to show you in a second, there's a waterfall further down the carriage road, and there was a photo workshop. I saw them in the parking lot when I was getting ready to go, and I was like, oh, I got to beat them out there because I don't want to be in the middle of 20 other photographers trying to get an angle. And I took a wrong turn, and they beat me there walking because I ended up having to go a half hour uphill on my bike. So this is where the workshop was when I got up there. This is another spot where Rockefeller had this bridge designed specifically so that as you're walking up the trail, you'd come around the turn and you would see Hadlock Falls through the bridge. Incidentally, Hadlock Falls is the only waterfall in the park. And here's a good trick for shooting Acadia. If you want to shoot some flowing water, wait for the rain, because the rain's going to all just wash down the mountains quickly, and you get all these kind of impromptu waterfalls all over the place that dry up 15 minutes after the rain stops. Padlocks here anytime though. I tried shooting it in winter once, but it just looks like a hunk of ice with snow on it. I mentioned the fog. Great fog on Mount Desert Island. And there's these great old fishing villages, so you could shoot the harbors and all that. It's another thing I always push is, don't do just the park. Look at the surrounding areas too. There's still things to photograph outside the park boundaries. There's this little lighthouse in the west side, all these buoys out there. He actually was renting this, and I called the number and say, I'm sorry, I'm not renting. I was just curious if I can go on your property and shoot. This is a Bass Harbor Head Light, which is one of the few operational lighthouses in the national parks. This is right in Acadia, and it's kind of one of the iconic scenes. You can see it better on this side. One of the iconic scenes of all of Maine. In fact, I believe this is on the Maine State Quarter. Again, now fall is kind of the popular time to shoot there, but I love shooting winter there too, because you can get a lot of access. That's a lot quieter, and this is the spot where I said that I was out on the ice and couldn't duplicate it in the fall. This is up at Eagle Lake. This was near whiteout conditions just a few minutes before this. And this is a marsh down off of Schooner Head Road. I really like this area for shooting. Most people drive by because you're getting to the Ocean Drive right after this. So people are kind of like going right to the Ocean Drive. But this is a really nice spot to shoot too. And then again, the surrounding areas. This is Marshall Point Lighthouse, which is such a great spot to shoot. It's only about an hour outside the park, but if you ever go up there, I highly recommend checking this out. It's south of Rockland, which is a great little town with Owl's Head Light and everything. But this is the lighthouse from Forrest Gump that he runs out on as he's running back and forth across the country. Really good to shoot a sunrise, sunset, anytime. It's such a beautiful spot that whenever I'm even close, I have to stop by there. Okay, so Everglades. Everglades was, I believe, the first national park that was set aside specifically to protect an ecosystem. And they're still having a hard time doing that because a lot of the water that used to flow through is now blocked up by communities north of that. And they're trying to restore as much of that traditional water flow as they can. The alligators are kind of a big attraction here for photography, and also a good wilderness survival thing to keep in mind. Again, I said, learn about where you're going before you go. One of the things with alligators is that a lot of people don't know they can outrun you for about 15 feet. So if you get closer than 15 feet to them, they can nail you. I mean, they'll have you before you know that they moved. So if you stay further than 15 feet away, you're relatively safe as long as you're paying attention because they can make that little sprint, but then they're... So my rule is I try to stay 30 feet away. And it paid off. I was shooting, it was this same trip. So this was last year, and I was shooting. There's an alligator at the edge of 9 Mile Pond, and he was just kind of sitting there. The light was gorgeous and everything. I'm shooting, getting some different angles. There's a couple of people around, no serious photographers, but people taking pictures with their phone and stuff. And, one by one they left, and I was alone there. And this whole time, he had just stayed at the side of the water, not really seeming to care about anything. As soon as that last person left, I was shooting, and he stood up and started walking right at me. And alligators don't do that. So, I knew, okay, well, he's doing something weird. I got to back off. And there was a rack of canoes there, and I went and kind of got behind it. And then he just kind of sat down again. So I'm all right. So I went and started shooting again. Sure enough, he stood up and started coming at me again. And I said, all right, well, I'm going to leave because I like living. And but where he was, in order for me to get to my car, I would actually have to, because of the angles, I'd have to move closer to him to get back to the car. So I actually left this way, walked back out to the park road, a couple 100 miles down the road, and then back around and through so I could get into my car. Not this alligator. Oh, and you know what? To this day, I regret that I didn't at least get the shot of him walking at me first. This is along the Anhinga Trail, which is kind of wild. I was out here this particular morning. I was out for sunrise, and I didn't know this happened, but I was out just kind of waiting for the light to get good, and all of a sudden I heard, kind of in the bushes, the rumble of an alligator. If you've ever heard them, it's this very primal, guttural noise that they make. And then there's one over here, and one over here. And apparently they do this in the morning to varying degrees, but I was there on a prime morning for this. And the weird thing is, you're sitting there and you don't see them. You think, you know there's a couple alligators around, and you're going to see them eventually, but it's before sunrise. And all of a sudden, I mean, they're here and here and here. I was surrounded by alligators that I couldn't see. And it was such a wild experience. I even I had a voice recorder with me, and I took it out and recorded it for a bit just to have it. And, I've played it for people sometimes. I should make it part of the presentation. It's really cool. And like I said before, Everglades, huge place for bird photography, especially along the Anhinga Trail where, one thing that, the wildlife in the parks is kind of used to having people around, so it's a little easier to photograph them than in most places. But one of the things that makes the Anhinga Trail so great is that in the winter, when the waters start to recede, it limits the areas that the birds can go and fish, eat some fish. The Anhinga Trail goes through one of the prime feeding grounds for the birds, so they tolerate the people because the fish are so easy to catch, which is also why you get the alligators there, because there's so many birds around. These are the crows in every national park. This is a good example of doing the research. So there's these, the barred owls are in one spot in the Everglades in the mahogany hammock. So the hammock is like the group of trees that's, the ground and the swamp gets a little elevated, and so the trees can grow. And in this one spot, I had read about this ahead of time, that if you go here, you might be able to spot the owls. So the light conditions were right. It was overcast, good conditions for shooting under the trees. So I went that day, and I wasn't seeing them, but I came across two other people. And again, people are friendly, and they share the information. And they saw me with the camera, and they said, "Hey, have you seen the owls?" And I said, "No, I came out looking for them." So they walked me to a spot where they had just seen 3 of them. And so then I was able to photograph him. And then another interesting thing, and you kind of remember the stories behind your photos, is I don't know what kind of birds they were, but there were like 4 of them that were harassing this owl that are all around him and trying to get closer to him. Again, the birds. This is at Echo Pond, which is in the south of the Everglades. The coots at Mrazek Pond. Mrazek Pond is another famous area for bird photographers because, again, same concept. As the waters shrink, the birds start congregating because the fish are getting more condensed. So for about 2 weeks in the spring, and it's very hard to predict when it happens, but it happens every year, all of a sudden, all the birds are in this pond. And so all of a sudden, all the photographers are at the edge of this pond. I wasn't there for that. I was there in January. But there's always something to shoot here. Sunrise comes up right behind the pond. So in this case, I'm shooting backlit in the sunrise light. And sorry? Mrazek, it's Mrazek. And this is in the southern part of the park. Very easy to access too. So another thing I was talking before about, hiking and getting out. The Everglades you can hike, but it's really great to get into a canoe. And if you're not afraid of, the camera going in the water, if you know how to canoe, you can be relatively stable, and it's not deep. The alligators really don't bother you. So here this was a 400, and I've, got it set up in the canoe, and I went out into 9 Mile Pond and the mangroves surrounding it, trying to photograph the birds and the alligators. And I was very fortunate because I never could have pulled this off on my own. As I was getting back to the boat launch, a British couple saw me and they shot this for me. Oh. And the funny thing is, this was a really windy day, and the wind was blowing right into shore. So as I was coming across, this is the alligator I was talking about, by the way, the one that came at me. It was a couple days earlier. So I knew about this alligator, and the wind is blowing me in the shore, and I need to get over here. And I'm like paddling and paddling and paddling, trying to keep the wind from blowing me into him. And then this British couple gets the photo of me. This is the Anhinga Trail that I was talking about, and I shot this photo specifically for this, just so you can kind of see. So it's a boardwalk that goes out over the water. It's a great spot for morning photography, evening photography, end of day. But again, you could spend the whole day here. It's such a great spot. All along this water, you get alligators and birds in the morning. You can see turtles. It's such a great spot to shoot. This is where I shot this alligator. Again, because you're on a boardwalk, you can get pretty close to them without feeling like you're in danger. There was somebody who told me, somebody saw me shooting, was it this? I don't know if it was this photo or not, but it was at the Anhinga Trail. The guy said, hey, I live near here, I come out here all the time. A couple years ago, there was a photographer who leaned through the railing with a wide-angle lens, trying to get a close shot of all the sleeping alligators. And all of a sudden, just out of nowhere, one comes up and just missed him. And I said, whew, was the lens okay? Little blue heron, great egret. The bird photography is great there. And this is only with a 400, which you wouldn't normally think of as a bird lens. Here I'm exposing specifically for the white and letting everything else go dark to help them stand out. And again, you can see it better on this. This is one he was actually coming out of the water to make that noise that they make, but then he got really close to the flower and I was like, oh, it looks like he's smelling the flower. So the wildlife is great in the Everglades. Landscape photography is a challenge. This is what you're looking at driving through most of the Everglades and hiking through most of the Everglades. It's flat and relatively featureless. So if you want to do landscapes, it's not the first place I'd recommend unless you're up for a challenge. But again, you're using the light, you're using the weather conditions, and you can do some things. So this morning there was this nice mist that came in with the sun rising, so I was able to play with that, and you get the hammock in the background. This is the same morning. Again, it was one of the few times I could really do some landscapes that I liked. And again, it was because of the light. I mean, that's what we're doing, right? Is we're always working around and chasing the light. And these are some clouds rolling in at sunset. This is actually with the 400, which helps compress the scene, just shooting out at the horizon. And remember I said that surprisingly, there's not a lot of places in the Everglades to do water sunsets. This is one. I mean, if you want to hike, you can get to them. But I mean, as far as easy to access spots, this is down at Flamingo. And I actually got this tip from one of the rangers that, if you want to shoot a coastal sunset, you can go to this spot. And sure enough, had a little clouds that day, but Bradley Key in the background and the sun in the winter just sets right over there. Again, getting out into other spots. Right next to Everglades National Park, if you drive up to the north, is Big Cypress National Preserve, which really could be a national park. It's such a wild location. You could shoot the cypress trees in the swamps. There's also some great bird photography there. And I love the light there. On an overcast day, you kind of get these really muted tones. I love working with it. All right, so Great Smoky Mountains. This is actually, not an easy day's drive, but in a day's drive from here, you can get there. And it's not an easy park for photography because you have to work around a lot of forests, so you don't get a lot of views except for the established ones. But again, you be creative, get off on the trails, ask around for some good spots, and you know what to look for, and you can get some good work. This is kind of the iconic scenes from the Smoky Mountains. You get these, this blue haze over the mountains. I shot this at dusk. That's from all the moisture being released from all the trees in the mountain range. And then this is at sunsets. Everything kind of gets this warm glow to it. The valleys, you kind of drive on the roads and the trails, and you get these great vistas to work with. Again, you get birch trees. You get some birch groves in there. Spring is a great time. A lot of people go to the Smokies in the summer and in the fall. It's not a great winter spot because the snow melts quickly, but spring is a beautiful time to be there. Magnolia trees bloom and everything. This is kind of a typical Smoky scene. There's a lot of rivers and streams, and this is of the Little Prong Fork. I'm not getting the name right. It's Middle Prong Little River. And there's some spots you can take some dirt roads that just go along the banks of these rivers, and you go miles into the woods and find bends in the river to shoot. This is Grotto Falls, which is you have to hike to get to. There's a lot of waterfalls in the Smokies. If you want to shoot waterfalls, you wait for an overcast day. Actually, an interesting thing about shooting in the Smokies is you don't really have to wait for overcast because of the mountains. Usually any waterfall is going to be in the shade of a mountain at some point during the day, whether morning or end of the afternoon. But you can get in and do this great waterfall photography. And one of the things I like about Grotto Falls is you can walk behind it and kind of shoot out into the woods. This is in Cades Cove, which is a section of the Smokies that's is an old settlement. When they established the park, they kind of moved some people out. Kind of a sad history to some of the parks in that regard. But they've kept the area. It was kind of an old farming community in the 1800s. And this is Sparks Lane. There's some nice dirt roads in there, some old homesteads and barns that you can shoot. I mean, I actually, when I go to the Smokies, I have to keep myself away from this area. I mean, this one spot, especially on Wednesday and Saturday mornings, they don't allow cars in until later in the morning, so you can hike or take a bike through the area, and you just have it to yourself. It's very quiet and a great place to work. This is also in Cades Cove in a morning mist. I shot this in 2003. Again, in Cades Cove, the backlight, the huge oak tree in the meadow. I spent about an hour here. Again, because I was there long enough. I said, I like the tree. I'm going to see what I can do with it. Like I said, there's historic structures in the park too. This is an old mill. And there's some wildlife in the Smokies too. There's they reintroduced elk into the Cataloochee section of the park years back, and the population has really taken hold. You can shoot elk in other parts of the park too, but it's almost guaranteed if you go to Cataloochee. In fact, you go to the Cataloochee area, you actually have to drive out of the park and around it to get to the spot. But you go way down to the end of the road in that section, and there's this huge meadow, and people will actually go and park there with sandwiches and grills at the end of the day. It's like a tailgating party for the elk coming out of the woods before dusk. It's crazy. Bears too. Man, if you want to shoot some black bears, the highest concentration of black bears in the US per acre in Smoky Mountains. I mean, you're almost guaranteed to see them. Don't pet them though. Olympic National Park. I love Olympic National Park because it's kind of like having 3 parks in one. You get the mountains. And the other thing is like the 3 different parts of the park all seem to have the perfect light for what they have to offer a photographer. I mean, the mountains, you get great sunrises and sunsets up there. You get when these low clouds come in, and you're above them. This is up on Hurricane Hill, I think I shot this, which is a little upward from Hurricane Ridge. The sun coming through the mountains. Another view, this is, I don't know if this is technically Puget Sound yet, but it's that body of water that empties into Puget Sound from up in the mountains. Another thing, so up at Hurricane Ridge, the deer are like famous for photography because they're almost like pets. They're so docile. So you could do some really great stuff. Like all I did is just sit down. I just sit down, and this deer just started walking up toward me. I mean, what could you ask for? I mean, you'd almost think I trained it to do this with the mountains behind it and everything. And it actually got within about 15 feet of me before it veered off. And then, as if the morning weren't good enough already, this guy shows up. And he was just so curious about me. I had an 80-200. I shot this with an 80-200. He got so close I couldn't focus on him anymore. So I just had to sit there and watch him. And he was like from me to you, just sitting. His mom was behind me, so I was a little nervous, but she didn't seem to care. And I just knew if I changed lenses that it would spook them. So instead, once he got too close, I just sat there and enjoyed the moment. Again, still up on Hurricane Ridge. This is at the end of the day, this field of lupin and the gorgeous light and the deer hanging around. So then I get another section of the park, the rainforest. You got a lot of old growth. This is in the Hoh rainforest. And it's another part of the park where there's just this small loop trail that goes through it. But you could spend the whole day there. Because again, the light is perfect for what it offers. It's always raining, it's always cloudy, and that's what you want when you're shooting this kind of environment. Polarizer, tripod, spend a whole day there. And wear a raincoat too. It's a walking bridge up to on one of the trails. I love Olympic National Park. I kind of think of it as the Acadia of the West because it's kind of mirrored in location and also someplace you're not going to get to by accident. You got to make a point to get out on the peninsula. This is Merrymere Falls, which is another place to hike to, but also just another beautiful spot. And then you got the coast. The coastline and the sea stacks and the tide pools. And again, the light, you get this fog that rolls in at the end of every day. I love this, like the trees that have come down and then washed back in. If it's okay, I'm going to speed up a little bit because I want to we've got about 12 minutes and I want to make sure we get through Grand Teton and Yellowstone too. But this is what I mean about the light being so perfect for the environment that you're in. At the end of the day, the fog comes in and then you get the sunset light. When my wife first saw this photo, she said, "Oh, I don't like when you do add the color to it." It's like, this is what it looked like. I mean, it was such. I mean, really. I mean, you could have just pointed the camera anywhere and gone like this and gotten a beautiful shot. And then this is later at dusk. I had walked way up the coast, then walked back again. It was dark before I got back to where I'd parked the car. And then looking down on the beach too, and the tide pools. Again, this is where that Tide app comes into play. This was actually a day I had gone out to shoot the sunrise, and it just didn't pan out. Some clouds rolled in that weren't called for, but it was low tide, and I spent the whole morning there just shooting the tide pools and all the stuff along the beach, and had to put on dry shoes when I got back to the car. This took me about 8 tries before I was able to get light that I liked on the sea stack, but I just loved the scenery. And this is actually, I'm kind of way out. You couldn't do this at high tide, it was low tide, so I was about 150 yards offshore and was able to shoot back with the shoreline behind the sea stack. This is at Ruby Beach in Olympic National Park. But again, you see what I mean? There's just such a variety that you can do there. Oh, skipped. Oh, and here, remember I was saying before about the arch, that's what I wanted to shoot the sunset through, but the clouds had rolled in and the photographer tipped me to the other spot. Again, getting outside the park boundaries, the Olympic Peninsula, big lavender growing area. And a lot of the farms will let you, just ask permission to let you go shoot. So you can do some cool stuff there too. Okay, Grand Tetons. We're going to do Grand Teton and Yellowstone in 10 minutes. Right. Okay, so Grand Teton, when I first went there, I thought of it as a one-trick pony. Because has anybody ever been there? Yeah? Okay, so you kind of know what I mean. It's like you go, and no matter where you go, all you can see are the mountains because they're so dramatic that you're just always looking at them. And so I used to think of it as just a mountain park, but there is so much there to shoot. And it's such a beautiful place. You know how sometimes you kind of have your camera on your shoulder and it might bounce the right way and it hits the shutter and just takes a random picture? In Grand Teton, that random picture was beautiful. So this is the west road in the park. This is such a beautiful drive. You come around this and you get the mountains just open up in front of you. This is down at Schwabacher Landing, which was actually closed this year because of the sequester. When the budget cuts, they actually had to, you could still hike into it, but you couldn't bring the car down into it. But great spot. This is about 200 yards upriver from that. This is the Snake River. Great spot to get reflections. The trick with reflections, of course, is you need no wind. So morning is usually better before the sun heats up the air and it starts causing ripples. This is the Molten Barn on Mormon Row, another famous spot to shoot. I had actually snowshoed out here. It was the last thing I shot on the trip last week. This is the other Moulton barn. They're two different Moultons. I guess they're a father and son. These barns are about a half mile apart from each other. Oh, and here's the, oh, I did include it. So here, this is just last Saturday. And this was the first time I'd seen the mountains all week because the snow was so thick, the snowfall was so thick that you couldn't see. This is up at Oxbow Bend, again, another popular spot to shoot. Usually it's, I don't know if you remember the beginning of the presentation, there was the panorama, and that's the traditional way to shoot it. But I was trying to come up with something different to do there, so focused just in on Mount Moran. And again, thinking differently, this is at Oxbow Bend, but instead of shooting this way at that scene, what's over here? And I turned, and there was there was the nice mist. And is this the one with the elk in it? No, they're not. There's another one I have like this. I didn't even see it when I was shooting, but there was a herd of elk that had come down to the water. I tried to reproduce this shot last week, but the snow was so heavy I couldn't even access the spot. Ansel Adams, one of his most famous landscapes was at the Snake River in Grand Teton, and you can't reproduce this photo because if you go back there today, this is what it looks like. All these trees have grown up and blocked the curve. This is up from Signal Mountain. We can get up and see the whole Jackson Hole Valley. You can do some really neat work up there. It's closed in winter. You'd have to snowshoe, and it's the elevation. I didn't even bother. I mean, it's kind of a, I don't want to call it, it's a windy drive and up a mountain. And this is in Grand Teton. So you do get some wildlife in Grand Teton too. The bison, not so much in the winter. They kind of head up north into Yellowstone. The moose. I had actually been directed to this spot to shoot a reflection of the mountains, but the moose showed up and it changed my day. The buck and rail fences. They're all over Grand Teton. And I was trying to kind of find some photos to include that, to capture kind of the essence of the environment there. This was right after a storm was blowing out. So it was clearing up around the mountains, but the clouds were still over the valley. And this was the sun setting behind the mountain, just got into the shadow of the mountain, and so shot up at that. Okay, so, oh, yeah, another one. So the National Elk Refuge. Again, I'm talking about shooting about the places nearby. This is right at the southern end of Grand Teton. So what wildlife do you think is great to shoot at the National Elk Wildlife Refuge? Anybody? No, not bison, but it's not elk, because this is what you see. This is with a 400 millimeter lens, and they're still far away. But if you drive up around the east side of it, it's bighorn sheep up there. And it's like all the locals know this, but you don't see it on the park website or anything. Funny thing though, you won't find them in the morning because there's a wolf pack that lives over there. So you got to go in the afternoon. Yeah, they can fly without wings. It's amazing. Okay, Yellowstone. So this is the last one, and it's, oh geez, if Olympic offers a lot. I mean, this is, you could spend a year in Yellowstone and not get bored shooting. In fact, when my brother was working there, they told him, they said, keep a camera in the truck because you might want to stop and take a picture. Just imagine if they said that to one of us. Not another spot. It's not great for landscapes. You kind of have to search out your spots, but you can find them. This is on a road that looked like you weren't supposed to drive on it. It was up behind some living quarters, and it didn't say you couldn't drive it. So I went, and I spent half the day on this dirt road, and great locations like that. This is in the Lamar Valley in the winter. This is again just last week. Very cold, but it was worth it. You get some great S curves in the Yellowstone River on the east part of the park. Whoa, geez, there's a ton of waterfalls in Yellowstone. They're still discovering them. This is Rustic Falls, which is pretty easy to get to, but to get a good angle, you have to be on rocks that you might not want to be on. Upper Yellowstone Falls, if you know what time of day to go. And again, this is about research. Right, kind of within a 15-minute window in the morning at certain times of the year, you can get a rainbow in the falls. One of the most famous scenes in the park system, Artist Point in Yellowstone, and you're shooting at the Yellowstone Falls. And common wisdom is to shoot here in the morning. Again, certain times of year at 10 in the morning you can get a rainbow in there, but it's always the morning light's best. The morning light is best. And again, if you stay at a park for a little bit, you can start to experiment, go against the grain, and go, I kind of got this little shaft of light coming through. But here, I wanted to see, what is it like in the afternoon? How come everybody says shoot in the morning? I thought the light was great. I mean, it's backlit, but you got this, the nice warm light kind of coming in and lighting up the side of the canyon. So I did what everybody said not to do, and I liked it. So, again, do the research, but you don't always have to stick to it. And the wildlife in Yellowstone. The bison that will block you from driving. Seriously, you can't drive in Yellowstone without this happening. But this very same, they call it a bison jam, so it was stuck. This one walked right by the passenger side of the car, and I was able to get this close up. You can't approach them to do this. That's against regulations, but there was nowhere I could go. I'm in the car. He couldn't hurt me. So I took advantage of it. The elk, especially in the northern part. I loved this opportunity. The other photographer left. I was like, you gotta be kidding. I stayed here for another 20 minutes shooting silhouettes of this guy. The bighorn sheep, he was a great model. At 45 minutes of shooting him, he just sat there for the whole thing. He even went to sleep for part of it. Coyote. I actually predicted, I saw this coyote about 5 minutes before I was able to shoot him, and there was really only one spot where I thought he could go based on where I saw him, and so I went and got there, and sure enough, he came through. This is again the advantage of being there for a while. I saw this nest a couple days before, but the light conditions were wrong. I said, if I come back in the morning, the other side of the canyon is going to be in shadow, but the nest will be in the light, and that would be a better time to shoot. And so I went and set up there, and sure enough, this one was going back and forth, hunting and then coming back again. And so I was able to I've got a whole sequence of them landing and taking off. And there's the little guys too. Don't forget the little guys. And then the geothermal features. Great part of shooting in Yellowstone. This was actually under moonlight, so you can see the stars up in the top here. And this is the hot spring melting through the snow. You can do like the silhouettes of the trees that have been killed by the sulfur, and you get the colors. There's so much work you can do. You can do the patterns. This is all bacteria and algae that will only grow in these conditions, and the heat and the chemicals and the sulfur in the water. And they also change fast. The geothermal features, they change. It's constantly evolving. So I shot this in 2010, exact same scene in 2012. A minor earthquake just shifted the vents underground, and now there's nothing coming out here. But it could be back to 2 more years. It could be back to all the colors again. This is in the Norris Geyser Basin, which I ignored the first 2 times I shot in Yellowstone, and then went there, and I can't spend enough time in this section of the park now. And this is all the steam coming out of the fumaroles. I shot, again, this is under moonlight. This was a 2-minute exposure, if I'm remembering correctly. This was a few years ago. And the geysers, you get around to this part of the park. It's not even a big geyser. It's about 10 feet. But I loved the light because the background was totally in shadow and backlit. And so I sat there. I blew through about 4 cards just shooting sequences because it goes off every few minutes. You get the mud pots, and it's kind of fun. You get there and you're like, I'm a sports photographer first, so like trying to time and get them bursting. I got a couple. They come quick. And this is a lodgepole pine that just, the acidity in the soil. You see a lot of these around the geothermal features. This is White Dome Geyser, which is one of the more predictable geysers. It's not one of the tallest ones, but because it's predictable, I kept going back, trying to shoot it in different conditions. So this is what I was going for. I wanted to silhouette it against the sunset. It was funny, while I'm waiting for this to happen, behind me there's another geyser that goes off much more rarely, and even when it does, it's not very big, but every now and then it'll hit 300 feet. And I turned around and it was doing it right behind me. I was so focused on what I was trying to shoot that I almost missed it. And that's this geyser here I'm talking about. I had shot this under moonlight and then got a sunset there on a different day. Again, going back to the same locations multiple times because I'm spending the time there. And that's Yellowstone, and that's the presentation. So thank you for coming. Again, please visit the website. If it's not up today, it'll be up soon, and sign up for the newsletter, and check out the book if you did.
Whether you're a hobbyist or a professional, B&H has the answers to your questions. Experience a world of technology at our New York City Superstore. Connect with us online or give us a call. Our staff of experts is happy to help.